Hello and welcome to The Hill is Always Greener, a show where four friends have chill discussions about Sonic the Hedgehog, both official and unofficial, to distract themselves from the inevitable passage of time and their own rapidly waning ability to relate to the youth. I'm Cyberlink.
I'm Falero.
I'm Game Buddy.
I'm Rock the Jake.
And we have a very special guest with us. Please welcome Sam Beddoes of FreakZone Games. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good to be here. Any excuse to just talk about Sonic, to just wax lyrical, you know.
Oh, we don't do that here.
Nothing to do with Rise of Lyric. Anyway, so moving on. I was trying to make that work and it was not going to happen. Just like Rise of Lyric.
I was going to say, to be fair, trying to make it work and it didn't happen is also a good allegory for Rise of Lyric.
But that wasn't what we're talking about today, or isn't, or shan't be, I hope. What are we talking about today?
Well, we are talking about some Sonic games, just maybe not the ones you expect. And I'm especially glad we have Sam here because we are talking about Sonic fan games, a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I don't know if you remember, but the wait between Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Heroes was... It maybe felt longer than it was, but it felt like ages. And back in the day, I kind of whet my appetite while waiting for that new release by playing tons and tons of Sonic fan games. And that's a love that has not diminished with time because there's been so many interesting and creative takes on Sonic over the years.
You got me digging at my repressed memories now. Is this like therapy or something?
I know. Some of these that we're going to talk about, I was like, oh no, that was a real game that I like downloaded to my family's Windows 95 PC. That wasn't like a fever dream that I cooked up as a kid. So yeah, I'm excited as well.
There is something quite magical about Sonic the Hedgehog that so many people have made so much fan content of it. I don't know if I've seen another franchise spawn so many fan games, or maybe it's just I wasn't paying attention because they weren't Sonic.
At least not without getting shut down by Nintendo.
Yes.
Yeah, that too.
That also is a contributing factor.
I'm sure we'll talk about it later in the episode, but I think it's fun to say up front that, although I don't think Sega's ever made a very official, public announcement about how they feel about fan games, they've also, as far as I can tell, have never really gone on a scorched earth policy of getting rid of them, and that's led to a lot of creativity in the fandom. So this is an especially fun episode for us to be talking about.
Yes, for as much as there is rightfully to criticize about Sega as a company, that they stand almost alone for being pretty cool with fan stuff in general. I will always give them props for that.
I mean, the fact is, Sonic Mania, it came from effectively legitimizing... it wasn't a fan game by any definition, but, it was fan game developers pitching to them, and they effectively legitimized that, us as fans and our sort of desire to make said games. And Christian Whitehead was, one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I think that is a very kind of positive way to approach it because, I feel like when you're on a dev team and you've been doing things for so long a certain way, it sometimes helps to just get fresh blood in there, get that different perspective to, try something different that, they might not have thought of otherwise. And that's not to say that fan games are better than the official games. I think that's a really unhealthy mindset. But
and a popular one on the internet.
Yeah, don't get me started.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think that the fan games do often provide something different that is more, complementary, that is meant to replace anything official. And I think that being able to try these different takes can also help inspire, more interest down the line. And it's even better when a lot of those fan game creators kind of graduate on to become full-fledged game creators and really kind of stretch their creative muscles, like Sam.
Thank you.
Because one of the things that the Sonic fan games tend to do is their new exciting thing that they do is how about we make it like they used to when it was good, and that worked out really well for a lot of them.
I do love going back to some of these I don't know if obscure is the right word, but some of these really quirky ones. And, you know, we're not going to focus on like the bad, weird, like, you know, some of the nasty ones out there. But I do love, one of my favorite things with Sonic fan games is they would do stuff with the classic formula that like an official game never would. And so that is why when I boot up a fan game and I'm immediately presented with like a wall of text or like a long cutscene, I'm almost like, okay, I'm ready, because this is something that like the original games would like never do. Like there's little cutscenes in Sonic games, but it's 10 seconds and the death egg fell. But so I love seeing stuff like that like would never be in a quote unquote real Sonic game.
Yeah, the history of Sonic fan games goes back almost as long as the history of Sonic itself, because we did some digging, and the very first Sonic fan game we could find was Sonic Boom from 1995, which predates the big kind of fan game boom as far as I remember, which really kind of took off like somewhere between 98 and 2000, I think. But
this is one of the ones that I distinctly remember downloading, because it's now I look at it, it's adorable, hand-drawn MS Paint graphics, and Sonic is throwing apples at all the bad guys, and I probably played this dozens and dozens of times.
The awesome thing about Sonic Boom was when I first played it, I could see where everything was from immediately, because I was using the Games Factory at the time and Click and Create, which were the sequel to Click and Play. And Sonic Boom was made in Click and Play, and most of it is Click and Play library graphics and sound effects, etc. But Sonic is a sprite. Oh no, it's the hand-drawn Sonic, isn't it? The MS Paint one.
Yes.
I'm thinking of another, because there was these sprites that came on the Sonic CD disc for PC that you could use, and so many fan games use those. Yeah, but this was Sonic on a green gradient with Tails just kind of glued behind him, like exactly following him pixel for pixel, with the little squiggles for his legs. And it's just, it's trees and bees and apples from the Click and Play libraries. Which, the thing is, right? Like, this is 95. I mean, most of us didn't have the internet at home. You couldn't go online and download MIDIs or grab the sprites from wherever, and so it's made it with what he had.
God, all the way back then. I probably didn't play this one till a couple years after, where I think it got included in a lot of like unofficial packs that went around, like Sonic web rings of like, oh, here's a bunch of Click and Play games, like you said. But yeah, I mean, that was way before that, before like you could go to just a random Sonic site and, oh, here's someone's MIDI version of the Knothole theme from Sat AM or something like that.
Yeah, it is good you bring up Click and Play and the Games Factory, because I feel like that was the kind of engine du jour for most of the early fan game output during that era. Just because it was kind of like ubiquitous in that it was easy to get a hold of and relatively user-friendly from what I remember. I tried building a game in it once and never quite got the hang of it. I wasn't quite as technically proficient. But it was clearly enough that, I probably remember playing close to 70 different fan games during that era.
It was almost too easy to get hold of, because they actually did at one point, they made Click and Play for schools. So some schools were actually giving Click and Play to their the pupils and everything. They tried to sell it as an educational product at one point. It was... oh gosh, what was his name? Francois something. I better look this up, actually. Francois Leonet. And he was originally famous for making STOS Basic on the Atari ST, which was kind of a game creation platform. And then he graduated into making Click and Play for PC, which then became the Games Factory and Click and Create. Today it's known as Click Team Fusion, and it's still knocking around. It's unfortunately, it's still kind of resembles Click and Play, so it's very, very dated at this point. You've still got you still have to use a plugin if you want to use more than 4 joystick buttons and a D-pad,
Oh boy.
But there are still devs that use it, but at the time, it was the thing about Click and Play and the Games Factory is that they were really fun and so easy to use and get a hold of, so we all had fun with it,
Now, in this current version of ClickTeam Fusion, do they include CNCS32 DLL, or do you have to go looking for it?
I think it still has to install that. I think it still actually has to install that damn thing.
That was the biggest problem with trying to replay some of these in the modern day, is I realized I didn't still have that around, and I had to go looking for it again.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they did Vitalize as well. It was their attempt at like a Flash style browser plugin where you could play games online, but nobody really used it because it meant that people had to install something to play your games. And we were all playing these at school.
Yeah, of course.
Where they wouldn't let us install things. But they had Vitalize, and I think it was Jordan Bieber was the guy that mainly tried to use that. That was Biebersoft, and they made the Nintendo spoofs, as they used to call them. I don't know if any of you guys remember Biebersoft.
I do. I remember Mario versus NWO.
Oh, yes. And Mario versus Wario Order, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I was making Mario vs. New Wario Order 2. He handed that to me, and I actually have a build of that never got finished.
Yeah, I was going to say, I recognize a certain cameo in level 2 of Sparky.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Bubba. Yeah. Yeah, that was a callback because me and Jordan used to do random things together. And interesting, Bubba has made kind of a resurgence. It was Ding Dong VG, wasn't it? He does his Bubba Fest and stuff. I'm sorry, we're talking a bunch of stuff without context. So Jordan was a prominent fan gamer, though he didn't used to refer to his games as fan games. He used to refer to them as spoofs. And generally,
nice.
Generally, they got away with being called a spoof by having like a really lame ending where it would be some adult joke, they found Peach in bed with Luigi or whatever. But he used to make these click and play games. You could tell it's click and play because there's never scrolling. He just, they were a lot of fun and they did really well. And his original game was called Bubba in the Third Dimension. And it was a 2D game, despite the title, but he would use a 3D program called, I think it was Instant 3D or something like that, to basically texture rudimentary shapes and then paste them together in MS Paint or even in Click and Play itself and make something that almost looked 3D. And it was just a character that went around pooping and farting. The thing is, it was very popular, not so much because everybody liked the pooping and farting, but because it was weirdly innovative, made really clever use of click and play. He thought of great ways to work around click and play's limitations. And that was why it was fun, right? Because click and play was incredibly limited. There wasn't even scrolling, but people would come up with ways around this or ways to, and it would make them creative. And that's why Sonic Boom, Martin Braid 1995 that we were talking about, it's got faux scrolling. There's a game engine with no scrolling in it, but he's got it creating trees and making them go across the screen and then reappear on the right. And it's fake scrolling, which is, I think that's just very creative.
Yeah, I never looking back on it now, I never would have guessed that it's whole that they're basically Flintstoning it with the repeating backgrounds.
Yeah, basically a handful of trees that are leapfrogging over each other and passing across the screen.
It's so interesting that I feel like that not so much mirrors it as that devs like continue to do stuff like that today. Like, people talk about like, the latest Resident Evil Village, like specifically, like credits, a middleware that is just for populating, the area with trees. And so,
like Speed Tree. Yeah.
Yeah. Or people using, like more modern things like, the latest version of RPG Maker or Unity or, stuff like that, the Unreal assets and all. And I've played a couple of those, and everybody always has like a bad example of just, this all stuff looks bad. But there are games that like straight up still use cheats and working around limitations like that. Or I love it when game devs talk about like, there's this nested sequence that if I, undid it would break the entire game. But hey, it works. So we put it out.
There are parts in Sparky which create that kind of treasure style faux 3D effect, right? Where they used on the Mega Drive, they had to use a lot of trigonometry and stuff like that to create the sort of things that orbit around other things in a 3D way that you'd often see on Mega Drive games. And there's quite a lot of that in Sparky. But being that Sparky was made in Unity, they're actually rotating in 3D space, but it's keeping the sprites flat. So I'm actually using 3D to fake 2D faking 3D.
I love it.
Beautiful.
I specifically, because I've, full disclosure, when I heard you were coming on, I said, I gotta finally play Spectacular Sparky. It looks great. I know I'll like it. And got to, I think it was the little mini boss with Nightshade, who's a super cool looking character. But yeah, the way her appendages stretch with her spikes, I'm like, oh, that is so cool. That is like some Mega Drive Vector Man. Yes, I really like that part, and
that's the wonderful Elsie Lovelock's voice as well.
Yes,
of course it is.
By the way, Sam here created a game called Spectacular Sparky, which you can play on various things.
Switch and Steam, I believe, at the moment, but we'll get to
those
that.
Those are the two. I do like that in Sonic Boom, the game by Martin Braid in 1995. At the end, once you beat the game, it says, "I hope you enjoyed the game, as it took me bloomin' ages to make." And it's like, yes, of course, this is a British person making a Sonic game. We were Sonic crazy back then, and we kind of still are.
The Americans were all making Mario fan games, dude.
Well, everyone was playing their Nintendo, regardless of whether it was Nintendo or not.
I was that one British kid that had the NES, or the NES as we called it. I say that one British kid. It was actually quite common in areas like mine where we were kind of poor because, Mattel really messed up the NES release here in Europe. So nobody bought it. But then towards the end, they just kind of sold them all off for cheap. Around the time the Super Nintendo was going to be a thing, they sold them for cheap. So all the kids whose parents couldn't afford Super Nintendos or whatever, they all went and bought the NES, and so all the kids in the sort of areas in the country and the poorer areas, we all had the NES from that era. And our friends were talking about Mario because of the Game Boy, and we ended up with that. So that was, I guess, that was the white trash console in the UK.
It never was, because of those problems, it never really took off that way until they were just offloading them cheap, I suppose. That explains why we had it when we did, because it certainly wasn't when it was during its prime, I tell you that.
Yeah, that and the Master System.
Oh, we loved us a Master System over here.
Yeah, Master System was big here.
Yeah.
It was huge here. It was like what the NES was over there. But it was the biggest console that wasn't a microcomputer here. I think that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah, I think we
sense.
in our research on some of the Sonic Master System games, we discovered that they just kind of didn't try over here in the States with the Master System. I think came with a couple of games, but did not come with Sonic 1, which would have been the big one.
No, they were pushing the Game Gear for that.
So, if you lose all your lives in Sonic Boom, Sonic gets summarily run over by Tails in the biplane, the tornado, makes a big splat noise, and then Tails crashes into a wall, and then the biplane explodes. It's pretty great.
But I haven't checked, but I bet I know what splat noise it is.
You know exactly what splat noise it is, because I immediately recognize it too from all those games.
Yeah, it was in the Click and Play sound effects folder.
I was going to say, right up there with that one guy saying, "Game over."
Yes, with the echo. Yeah. I think the Game Over was originally for, what was it? There was Rapunzel. I think it was a Rapunzel game that came with Click and Play, because they would famously include, demo games so that you could look inside the code. The code, I say in massive inverted commas, but it's more the actions, conditions, and events is what they call how you made the games in those, like a spreadsheet type thing. And they would include demos so you could look at them and kind of reverse engineer them, And yeah, the one was, I think it was, it was called Romeo, and you had to save Juliet from a tower. And you had to just go, it was, it was basically a Donkey Kong clone. We had to get a key and open the door. And there was a lot of sounds from that. And I think that Game Over was in that one.
Yeah, that one definitely made it into a few of the games in my big old fan game folder.
Yeah, so I remember finding Sonic Robo Blast and downloading it. And I had the Games Factory at the time, but I knew it was a click and play game. Again, it's a click and play game because there's no scrolling. But Sonic Robo Blast, if somebody today looked up Sonic Robo Blast and watched it, they'd be like, well, this is garbage, right? This is some kids made this. But it was so charming and so ambitious. And for something using click and play, it was like, even when I had the Games Factory and I had built-in scrolling, you'd load up Sonic Robo Blast and you just admire that guy's, just his ambition. And even No, so you'd have, the way he got around scrolling was he just had levels in screens, almost like a Zelda, So you'd walk to the right and then you'd appear on the left of the next screen. A MIDI of that Sonic Electronic song that came out not long before then. I'm sure you guys know the one. The ring, ring, ring with the ding, ding, ding and all that.
Yeah, I know that more from Robo Blast than I do first level than I do from the actual song.
Well, it would restart every time you flip to a new screen because, again, click and play wouldn't play the midis over the frames. So you would just go ring, ring with that, But it was long. It was a long game. It had a lot of levels, a lot of bosses, and the bosses did things that... There were things that some of those bosses did there are tricks that I still use now that I learned from Sonic Robo Blast. Dumb things that I brought into my games, like seeing, a boss that fires out in 8 directions at once and certain things like that. I remember first seeing that in Sonic Robo Blast. And if I remember right, I could never beat it, but you couldn't protect the source code, so to speak. So anytime you downloaded a click and play game, if you had click and play or the games factory or click and create, you could just open the file up and just browse inside it. And that was how I effectively saw the rest of Sonic Robo Blast when I couldn't beat it, just opening it up and running different frames and scenes and stuff. But it looks, if you looked it up on YouTube and looked at it now, it looks like crap, but the compare it to Sonic Boom, which we were just talking about, and like that guy's ambition and creativity in that game is absolutely fantastic, which is maybe it was no surprise that he then went on to convert the Doom engine into a Sonic game,
Yeah, exactly.
Just the resourcefulness of it.
I don't think it's much of an exaggeration to say that the sequel to Sonic Robo Blast, it might be the definitive example of a Sonic fan game.
Yeah. Went on to that, and it was worked on for probably over a decade, and people still make mods for it now, and there's a whole community around that game. But it's not like, if you look up Sonic Robo Blast 2, a lot of people are going to see it and be like, oh, it's just like some Doom mod. But it's the resourcefulness and the creativity of it and the ambition of it. There's something so captivating about that. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I feel like it definitely transcends that maybe even like a very casual observer might have of, I don't want to really fall down the rabbit hole of weird, unofficial games. Like, I feel like Robo Blast 2 almost is like, you can recommend it to just about anyone. And I mean, sheesh, I just booted it up again the other day and just plugged in a controller, and I'm like, I mean, might take you a little bit to get used to it, because it does have that classic, because again, like you said, it's running on a converted Doom engine. It doesn't have like the full camera perspective of like a modern 3D platformer, but it's a whole ass game. It's really great. I feel like it's pretty easy to recommend Robo Blast 2 to just about anybody who's curious.
Even Digital Foundry did an episode on it, and it's hard work to get a Doom, 3D rotational sprites in a Doom style game. You have to draw every animation from many angles.
Yeah, I mean, I did kind of want to mention, just paid lip service to the Sonic Chaos games, which are another couple that I remember playing. Like, I think this might have been the first set of fan games where I was like, wow, I can't believe they did this. This is like a real Sonic game. Even looking at it now, I'm like, oh no, it's still, it still has the janky charm and stuff. But I remember, again, it was one of those where I think a couple of them have some story elements to it, with, again, little dialogue pops up, and me being, gosh, was I 7-8 years old, again, just thought it was like, wow, I didn't even know games could do this.
Yeah. And those games had a lot of like really interesting ideas too. Like, I remember, rings weren't your health in at least the first one. Instead, you would, die in one hit, but you would use the rings to basically pull off special moves and different, effects or whatever. And I give props to MagicgrafX for sticking with it as long as they did. Like, I counted between full games and demos that never got finished, there were 11 different games in that series.
Wow.
Wow, Lord.
That's cool.
Made in the span of like 3 years.
Worth noting that even though these are called Sonic Chaos, this has nothing to do with the Mega Drive Master System Game Gear game of the same name.
Yes, I think maybe the creator didn't know that those existed.
Which is understandable.
Yeah, well, I remember it being a bunch of graphics ripped from the Sonic 3 and Knuckles PC collection, and a bunch of click and play library things kind of working together. So there was like, it's like Angel Island, but with like kind of...
I recognize those big trees.
Yeah, the weeping willow trees and the clouds, the little flat clouds and stuff. And if I remember right, there's like a flower that keeps like open with like a smiley face on it that keeps opening up and closing. And that click and play, what was it? Microsoft Sans Serif font in the corner and everything.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm just rewatching the first battle of sorts where Tails is piloting the tornado and Sonic's on top, and you're chasing after Knuckles, who is flying through the air, not just gliding. And Knuckles proceeds to astral project himself towards you, and you have to deflect it back at him.
Yes.
Multiple times, at which point he dies and goes, "Ah!"
Knuckles shoots Knuckles at you, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember that was another thing I thought was cool, that Knuckles was like the antagonist / bad guy, and because I guess I think I've said this before, the Archie comics were the ones that pushed the Knuckles was Sonic's friendly nemesis, but they would occasionally beat the shit out of each other. So I remember even thinking then with this fan game, I was like, oh, Knuckles, he's the kind of the bad guy in this one. Wow.
Yeah, the roles were reversed in STC. Sonic was just an asshole to Knuckles all the time. He was just trying to mind his own business.
Look, man, I'm just trying to live my life.
Exactly, yes. I love that part of Knuckles in STC where he's
always like, "Well, you on my damn island again?"
Yes, or he spends literally dozens and dozens of issues just trying to get back to the floating island with his chest of and just stumbles into like the worst scenarios, like Wild West towns trying to kill him, or
the Wicker Man.
Yes. Oh, it's very charming. I love that stuff.
Oh yeah, that Nigel Kitching stuff. That was. I mean, you're talking to a couple of Brits here, and I mean that was the peak of Sonic for us.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
I mean, looking back, it sure beats the hell out of what the American comics were doing, which is hard to describe in one sentence with Knuckles.
I'll say what I said earlier, but do not get me started.
Yeah, so we won't.
Yes.
Someday, maybe we'll call you back up for that one.
Yeah, we'll have a 5-hour podcast with a whole bunch of swears to believe.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's inevitable someday. But Sonic Chaos was an interesting one because, like I said, there were a lot of games in that series, and it was really interesting to see, the developer kind of expanding their skill set and trying different things. Like, eventually, once the series was freed from the confines of the click and play library, they really managed to do some interesting things with the presentation and with multiple playable characters, expanded move sets. I think one of the later ones actually had Sonic able to do stuff like wall jumps.
Man, they had rain particle effects and it was good stuff.
That was the first one of these the fan games in this list where we see rain coming down in a Sonic level. Mm-hmm. I just think fans like doing that apparently because it does look pretty cool, to be honest.
The thing is, because Click and Play had no option to protect your code, so to speak, when you made the executable. You could just grab everybody's game and open it up, and so everybody started stealing each other's stuff, basically.
Of course.
A lot of the ripped graphics at the time were just taken from other people's games. And I think Sonic Chaos, was in the sort of era of, we used to call them Libs, LIB files, which meant library.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically in Click and Play or the Games Factory or whatever, you just put a whole bunch of sprites, graphics, objects into a frame and save them as a lib file instead of the usual extension. And then people could just open them up in their game. They could just have them in their list of libraries, and you'd have a drop-down menu of just all the stuff that was in it. And I know there were a lot of things like scans of official Sonic art or stuff taken from the discs and everything. All the stuff that came with the Sonic CD, PC disc, it was folders full of stuff on there, and people put them into libs, and people that knew how to use emulators and rip from them at the time would make the libraries for everybody else, and it became like a community. You know, everybody kind of helped each other out in interesting ways.
I thought you meant a community of thieves stealing from each other.
Just like the actual video game industry.
Yeah.
You could just steal all their assets. You could steal all their assets and then just start drinking their lib tears.
Sort of in a dark alley, like, hey, got any libs? Got any libs, man? He like, opens up his jacket. He's like, I got Sonic Chaos.
It is you do notice even if you're just looking at videos of a lot of these fan games, but especially the ones that use a lot of sprites, is you will see at the end the ones that were nice enough to properly credit everything. Yeah, a lot of like the same a lot of the same fan sites that were around at the time that had like these sprite sheets that were ripped, and like you said, it's just kind of cool that it was I'm sure there were quite a few that didn't explicitly seek permission, but it was kind of a like, hey, we're all making fan games. There wasn't even a way to make money off of this stuff back in the day, and so it was all just kind of like shared around. And that's cool.
We're all stealing from Sega. None of us are free of sin here.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is trying to back up in some kind of thesis that Sega lost a sale from an official game by sharing old fan games. That's for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
I don't need a Saturn. I've got Sonic Robo Blast.
I don't need to buy this Nirvana CD. I've got this MIDI of Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yeah, and then I ripped out of a Sonic fan game.
I'm sorry, Sam. This is the part where I call you out.
Well, there was two. There was because my first first game that I ever put out on the internet was Mario and Sonic. I called it Mario versus Sonic, but then originally it was like one with like 4 levels. But then I added more levels before I put it on the internet. For some reason, I felt like it needed an upgrade before it went online, and it became Mario and Sonic because for some reason, like 13-year-old me thought that Mario and Sonic sounded more like official than Mario versus Sonic. And
this ever happens for real, they probably wouldn't fight. So let's go with the.
I think everybody talks about
fight.
that.
They play Olympic Games together, apparently.
Yes, predicting the future.
But it was always like, everyone's like, oh, Mario versus Sonic, who would win? And it was always a thing. And then so I was like, well, I'll make it. And I didn't have. So Mario and Sonic first one, I had sort of partial access to the internet. So the Sonic sprite in it was actually from the Sonic CD disc. There was a file full of icons for the game, alternate icons and that. And I grabbed one of the icons and took the background out and I had the sort of the upper half of Sonic. And then I just added legs and animated them. And it was just Mario and just Sonic. And it was 2 players that would fight through a bunch of levels from the games. And I got the backgrounds and MIDIs and stuff from the internet at school. I would take floppy disks into school and grab whatever I could at lunch break and then take them home with me for the game until eventually I was able to upload it to the internet. But Mario and Sonic Return is the one that everybody remembers mostly, which was like in a big wrestling ring type thing with a bunch of other people's original characters and stuff in the audience, and like advertising for other websites as like the as the sponsor bits at the edge of the ring, and that used like rip sprites and stuff. And yeah, if I remember right, it had a Nirvana MIDI, didn't it? That
was like the call out before each match where Freddy the Frog would tell you who's competing.
People remembering Freddy.
I mean, I admittedly remember Freddy because you brought him up last time we talked about this.
Oh yeah, but I'll just say to anybody that might in any way remember Freddy from 1999, I'm currently in my spare time. I'm working on big things with Screenwave Retroware on my work hours, but in my spare time I'm working on a remake of Freddy. Just Just putting that out
Oh,
there.
beautiful.
With Luke Tarlo, a Thunder Dragon of Psycho Waluigi and Psy Cutlery and all of that. It's my kind of partner in crime on that remake. I just there's a first for you guys as an exclusive.
Nice.
But yeah, Freddy was
Breaking news in February when this episode comes out.
Yeah.
Freddy was my original character, Do Not Steal. So I actually put out original games as well as fan games at the time, and Freddy was one of my original games. And so when I made Mario and Sonic Return, like Freddy was I remember right, he was the sort of announcer when he was the Mean Gene. He would like say who was going up against each other. And the crazy thing is, the reason it takes place in a wrestling ring. Because originally it was going to be like the first game, but you selected your characters, and I had it so that it would load one of many levels. So you'd select a level, like in Super Smash Bros. I had Angel Island and stuff like that, and it would like create the characters that you had selected. Actually, if I remember right, I didn't know how to make it create the right characters in the scene, so I had it so that they were all there, and it would destroy the ones that hadn't been selected. But that would cause the game to just crash and freeze up a lot. And so in the end, I ended up making a separate scene for every possible combination of the two characters.
Oh, wow.
I think there's only like 8 actual characters you could play as. But yeah, I ended up making a scene for every possible combination.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, so I was like, I need to create a background that works for this rather than having a bunch of levels. I just need one background. And I was like, well, it can't be Mushroom Kingdom or Green Hill. So I was like, what about a big like wrestling ring, boxing ring type thing, and so that's where that came from. And when I was putting the audience together, I put Bubba and Dr. Butchin, the villain from Bubba, in there. I had Freddy. I had a bunch of Nintendo characters that weren't playable, but also a bunch of other people's original characters were in there. And I'm
seeing a lot of Mario RPG characters in the back there.
Anything that I could rip from Jordan's games.
I do. That's another thing I do now have distinct memories of in fan games is getting to know people's original characters through they would just happen to be in like 2 completely separate fan games, but like, oh, I recognize that, green edgy hedgehog from this other game. And it was just another, like we said before, another community thing of just like, oh yeah, sure, I'll put my friend's character in here.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think that's kind of cool. Probably, fan games were probably where I first learned about like the famous glitch Sonic characters that have become
Ashura,
kind of canonized. Yes, Ashura and Wachina Starline, which have, ascended several times over to be like official characters now in other media, and that's cool too.
If there was ever an inside baseball joke, there was a tweet that I made around the time they first showed the Sonic movie when they had that horrible, ugly Sonic design, and I put a tweet out and I was like, nobody's going to get this, but the handful that do, I know are people of culture. And I tweeted, when you're making the Sonic movie and you put too many waterfalls in it, and it was Sonic, the big ugly meow Sonic, photoshopped him to be bright green with black around his face and stuff. But looking in the crowd, the audience of Mario and Sonic Return, there's I can see Binky and I can't remember the guy's name, Mech or something like that. It was there's a little blue, it looks like a little blue Kirby with big eyes, and there's a green one with a sword as well, and that was a game made in Click and Play, an original game. They changed their name to Neko Kawaii Productions in the end, and I lost contact with them. And because, if I remember right, I just talked with them on AOL Instant Messenger, and then that thing just kind of died out. And
oh wow! Yes.
But that person, they used to go by the name of Splat. That was their name of their game production company, just Splat Games. And they had this game, Binky's Adventure, which was, I consider it the original click and play game equivalent of Sonic Robo Blast. It was so creative with its limitations. And it had a whole story and little cutscenes where they'd all talk to each other and things. And every little level had a reason in the story. It was this wonderful little thing called Binky's Adventure. It's really hard to find now, and I wish I could get in contact with the guy again and even make something with them someday. I years and years ago I attempted a remake of Binky's Adventure with his blessing, and never finished that. But if anybody can find Binky's Adventure by Splat, it's like Sonic Robo Blast. It's a mess, but it's so resourceful and ambitious and creative, and I really fell in love with it. Again, much like with Sonic Robo Blast, there are things from Binky's Adventure, like tricks and ideas, that I still use today. In the first Angry Video Game Nerd game, there's a boss that you fight while falling. So you're just falling endlessly, and you can move around the screen while you shoot. But that's the final boss from Binky's Adventure.
That's super cool.
Just, wonderful stuff.
This goes out to all you Hill is Always Greener listeners. Please help us solve the mystery of Binky's Adventure and the creator thereof.
I told y'all before this that, I felt a little bad because my biggest memories of Sonic fan games are the silly ones. But now I'm like, no, I think that's going to fit right into the discussion now.
I can't wait to get to that.
Honestly, the silly ones, you probably might as well just skip forward since they're around the same timeline. Like,
yes.
Some of those are like the most memorable ones. Like, I think we all remember the Search for Knuckles, a literal 5-minute game.
Wonderful game
that I played dozens of times.
Freddy the Frog, the original one, has a sprite taken from that. There was a big arrow because there's a bit where you go down the well. So you're on Angel Island. Sonic gets to Angel Island on a rubber ducky, like a rubber dinghy.
Yes, naturally.
And he gets up onto Angel Island, and there's a dog, Leslie. It's like Lassie, and it's going, "What's that, boy? Knuckles fell down the well." And he goes down the well, and in the well, there's just loads of signs that say, "Knuckles this way, Knuckles in here," and then a big flashing like neon lights, arrows. And one of them is a bunch of red lights that make the shape of an arrow, and they're all like flashing on and off, and like a Vegas style thing. And Sonic says, "Something tells me Knuckles is this way." But that one particular big flashing arrow I actually used in Freddy the Frog. Like, we just grabbed things from each other's games and thought nothing of it,
I highly suggest people just go look up I think the video itself might be a little over 5 minutes of a playthrough of the Search for Knuckles, because it's very charming. Because some of the like heavy text based ones I was almost a little like cautious of revisiting, and I'm like, hey, look, man, I also thought problematic humor was funny back then, but no, all of these are like incredibly innocent in their silliness, especially the Search for Knuckles.
You see the people that were even good people then and didn't have to make low-hanging fruit jokes,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I was gonna when I was gonna get to this, but I'll say now the point where I left fan gaming was when it stopped being about this that we're talking about right now. This guy had a fun idea, and even if it's obnoxious, like, dark horror Sonic or whatever, but when it stopped being about that and started being more about just showing what you're capable of making, because the what's now known as the Sonic Worlds engine, which is famously used for Freedom Planet, and I think even Spark the Electric Jester, that was being built and being iterated on. Originally, it was Damaziel's 360 degree engine, or it's called something like that. And as that stuff was coming up, it really became more about showing how well you could replicate the Mega Drive games in the Games Factory or Fusion or whatever. And it just became this weird like one-upmanship, like this showing off pissing contest, if I'm allowed to say. And the fun kind of got ripped out of it. And when you did come up with an original idea and create something different, and you used, say, I don't know, if there were loops, you'd use like a pre-programmed path movement and stuff like that, or you just do no loops at all, and people would be like, well, could do with some loops, it could do with the 360 degree engine or whatever, and it stopped being about fun. And that's when I kind of dropped out. There was another favorite of mine called I don't know how to pronounce it. It's either Chow Mega or KO Mega.
Yeah, I remember that. I believe that was by the same creator of Sonic Chaos.
MagicgrafX, yeah, I think of that. I mean, I loved that because it didn't try to use loops or any of those things. It did what, they did what they could do, but they did it really, really well. And once again, Chow Mega, KO Mega, whichever it is something I often go back to when I'm creating stuff. When I did some of some of Sparky and things like that. I just remember the feel of that game, the way it felt. It wasn't trying to recreate anything else, but to just like make a really cool looking, feeling, sounding game. And it was awesome. I think it was never finished. They only ever made 2 levels, but yeah.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, even as a non-game development layperson, just that feeling of once you start seriously trying to replicate like the classic Sonic games, or even now like some 3D Sonic games, is I feel like even though with a lot of these games we've talked about, you have this is a fan game doing its own thing, and you can cut it a little slack for being janky or just straight up bad because of the charm factor. But once you're starting to try and like one-to-one replicate it, I think you do invite, whether it's warranted or not, that criticism of, oh, well, this isn't, this could be better. Like you said, people wanting like, oh, well, why doesn't it have the loop from Sonic Adventure or whatnot? And I think the other direction, like we've already joked about, is people, immediately launching the other way of going like, wow, this is how it should be. Yes. Sega, hire this man.
Yeah, exactly. This is what Sonic 4 should have been. I mean, I'm not going to defend Sonic 4, but you know what I mean.
Oh, no.
Yes, it's and I think that's unfair to a lot of these developers who even if are using like, doing a 3D Sonic fan game as like part of their further education or just like testing the waters, and then like might eventually turn that what they've learned that into a like something they own. I always hate to use that because it sounds so like like it turn it into an intellectual property that they can sell and make money on, which is that's fine, but I always try and use language as like an original thing that is theirs. They don't have to worry about like people inviting Sonic comparisons necessarily.
Yeah.
But that is like such a minefield of you're trying to make it feel like a real Sonic thing, and it just feels like you're damned if you do or don't if it's not perfect in every fan's mind, which is impossible.
I feel like here's my sort of situation is they work, like so many fans work so hard to replicate the old Sonic style because it felt that sort of thing was lost for a long time. So that's why we had stuff that led to Sonic Mania, which was this damn near perfect recreation of the old Sonic style. But now we've got that. People are like, okay, this is the blueprint. This is all we need. Let's do that going forward. Everything is Sonic Mania now, and it all comes a bit homogenous at this point.
Yeah, I think that's for that reason. Like I find myself being more interested in the 3D Sonic fan games than the 2D ones, because it's like 2D Sonic is a nut that has been cracked at this point, in my opinion. You can make a really polished one of those and it can be really fun, but also like I feel like there's not a whole lot of really interesting new things being developed in that front, whereas everybody has their own interpretation of what 3D Sonic should be and how it should work. So you're getting a lot of like really kind of disparate and often really interesting takes on how that can or should or whatever work.
Do you know, I'm sure we'll get to 3D ones at some point, but I think what you could say about it is that when everybody says, Sega don't know how to make a 3D Sonic, and you could say, well, if you know so much better, why don't you make your own? And they go, okay.
There is something beautiful about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to see a 3D The Search for Knuckles.
Oh my god! Now I want to see that.
Just a bit in that way.
Full 2022 60 FPS 8K remake.
The Angel Island.
I feel like we should.
Fully voice acted, choreographed cutscenes.
I think we need to dub that.
Oh my gosh!
I think, like, for real though.
It's that moment where Angel Island is sinking into the ocean and it tips up. And at the time, this was not long after the Titanic had come out. The James
that was
Cameron
intentional.
movie.
That was very intentional.
Yeah. Well, the point is they go running up to the corner of Angel Island, the bit that's still not sunk, and he says, "Sonic, this is where we first met." It plays My Heart Will Go On, a MIDI of My Heart Will Go On.
Yes, of course. Yep.
I was gonna say, I don't think we can dub that until we find a good Tom Hanks imitator.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, not to spoil the whole thing, but the plot of The Search for Knuckles hitches on Sonic getting a call on his mobile telephone from the character Forrest Gump.
Yeah, honestly, like a lot of the most
goodness.
memorable games from that era were the ones that were just kind of doing their own thing regardless of what everybody else thought. Like the two I immediately think of are When Tails Gets Bored, which was kind of a game adaptation of a series of like hoax images that had been posted up. And it's all weird, kind of weird levels where it's, Tails turns off all the lights and Sonic has to navigate the level in the dark. Tails, clones himself and Sonic has to destroy all of the clones. There's a level where you have to race against Tails and Dr. Robotnik, stuff like that. And I remember actually being really impressed with that game back at the time because it had like a lot of really innovative stuff to it. Like there was an achievement system that would unlock new content based on whether you completed these objectives. And it would keep track of which ones you've been doing. Like there'd be special stages to get the true ending, unlockable bonus stages, test rooms, an entire like Choo Choo Rocket themed minigame level, stuff like that. And I just remember like being really impressed with that at the time, even though the game itself was often a little bit jank, as most Games Factory games were at that time. And then the other one I immediately think of is Tale of Two Sonics, which was a crossover between the game Sonic world and the Archie Sonic world. And listeners, I am eternally apologetic that I did not record the first time I streamed it for these guys to watch. Because I wish that I had an audio like log of the out-of-body experience that Jeremy had when Sonic the Hedgehog name-dropped Princess Ayaka from Tenchi Muyo. And he just...
Because, I mean, let me give you a little setup here. Is this, yes, like you said, this game, it's Sonic Prime, the Sonic game universe, which, hey, speaking of things that transcended into official things. But yes, a crossover with the Archie comics, specifically, I believe the Archie comics around when Mina Mongoose showed up and all of the characters went back to high school. And so that specific era of those Archie comics. And, here we are, we're joking about, again, I love this because there's full cutscenes full of, lots of text dialogue and a whole story.
A lot of original sprites and hand-drawn portraits.
It's got that Hotline Miami kind of look to the dialogue portrait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a boss fight against Jeffrey St. John or Sinjin, the skunk, which is great. Little headcanon that's
second only to the boss fight against Wing Gundam.
Yes. Another, after the Tenchi Muyo bit, I'm like, oh yeah, Wing Gundam's here. Sure, why not? But yes, and we're, poking fun at that. What was it I said? We joked about how fast Shadow goes from 0 to out of character in fan work because he immediately falls in love with Mina Mongoose, who is obviously his soulmate from an alternate dimension. But yeah, and then all of a sudden the anime references start, and it was a lot of fun. I don't know. You also ran into some trouble playing it, especially the special edition remake, where some of the music tracks broke. But absolutely worth checking out. It was very charming in its throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
It was so nice.
In retrospect, these like parody / comedy fan games, they stand up so much better. And, I think of, even outside Sonic, you go to like, there was like El Leyendo de Smelda, Macarena of Time. And,
oh my gosh, I remember that. Holy crap.
Yeah, stuff like that. Instead of like Jabba Jabba, you've got like a giant Pez dispenser that you go inside. And
the thing that sticks out with me of Tale of Two Sonics is that I could see myself at the same age of like 12, 13 of this. Yes, like you said, just throw every silly joke that is probably not original. I mean, I remember writing my fan fictions and whatnot where it was just, I'll take this joke from Animaniacs or Freakazoid or whatnot and just tweak it to where it's Sonic. But also, like, there is an incredibly, like, played straight, self-serious, like, subplot where, like, Mina Mongoose almost dies and all of the characters are very upset. And I'm like, yep, man, like, that, I remember, like, that was me. Like, throw in a poop and fart joke, and then a major character dies, and it gets very serious. And it does just warm my heart.
And that's how Sonic F was created.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. Not even gonna deny it. So it really warms my heart to see that preserved, that specific era of creativity.
One day I'll go back to it. I mean, I work hard to get a lot of comedy and stuff into Sparky. Had John Locke of Big Punch Comics write that. Oh, in fact, talking of John and Big Punch, I should really go back to say about this, about my start with fan games and stuff, because when I first started secondary school, I met John and some other kids, and they had brought with them from their primary school, they'd made a Sonic fan comic, though it wasn't a fan comic of Sonic as such. It was an original characters do not steal, and it featured the leader of the team was Donic the porcupine. And they had Rocket the squirrel and things like that. And actually the name of Nightshade and Sparky came from that comic that they had, and I sort of joined. I drew a couple of them for them because they were still doing, they kind of had their own little Sonic the Comic style team where John would write, Richard would draw, one of us would color, and all stuff like that. And I remember I drew one where he'd come up with like dinosaurs. There was some dinosaurs involved, and I remember, I could draw dinosaurs, let me draw this one and stuff. And he kept the name. The name, it was called Big Punch, but even now his comic writing and producing company are called Big Punch Comics.
Nice.
And we did those. And I remember one of my first attempts at a game was because I had the Games Factory. I was like, I'm going to make a Big Punch game, and I had Donic the porcupine, and it was terrible, but it was it was proof of concept that I could make a game. And I had like sounds from the click and play library, so he would die and he'd go "Bleh!" and stuff like that. It was terrible, but it was a start.
That whole scenario is just like, man, if that ain't the dream, you take your old, schoolyard Sonic comics with the serial numbers filed off and just keep it going.
Yeah, but getting him to write Sparky, the script for that and all the dialogue and everything, it was like getting the band back together, And I was like, because the thing is, I can do stupid comedy, I can do playful comedy, but if I want like a solid story, so I did AVGN, all the writing for the AVGN games was all myself with like input from actual Cinemassacre and the publishers and everything, but with Sparky, I was like, we can do this dumb comedy, but I want a story as well. So I brought John in, and it was great. And he's working with me now on something that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Oh,
which, okay, if you'll forgive me for being the American Yank who started reading STC just a couple years ago, and also the guy that just saw Boss Baby, this new movie's given me Boss Baby energy, is that the writing in Sparky, I feel like, does evoke, I guess I would say it feels like it came out of that era of British funny comics, just from my experience, and I find it very charming, and just as like, oh yeah, like that stuff is still funny. Like, you don't, it doesn't need much updating. That style of, it's hard for me to put my finger on it, but like dry, silly jokes.
I mean, you can still pick up issues of the Beano now. They're still making a lot of the British comics, and they're still the same humor. It's timeless.
I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Hey, I think that is definitely an example. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
We're not saying it's outdated at all, trust us.
Oh, no.
So I guess we're on to another era of fan games then.
Like, we've been joking a lot about like a lot of the older ones, but there have been some like legitimately amazing fan games over the years. Obviously, Sonic Robo Blast 2 is the one that has persisted. We've talked a little bit about that already. I don't know if we're going to go into too much detail because I feel like that one is both big enough and influential enough that it needs its own episode.
And it really speaks for itself in a lot of ways as well.
It really does.
And we'll have to talk about the kart game as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that too. And the Persona game.
Oh goodness!
Oh my goodness!
Before we move on, I do think we have like we've already brought up Sonic Mania. I do think we would be, and even though we did talk about like everybody's just trying to copy, I think we do at least need to give Christian Whitehead's original Retro Sonic demo its due, because I mean the grandfather of what would become like we said, Sonic Mania is almost the like full realization of fan games gone super legit, and has become like the definitive thing that long time and even like casual fans will point to Mania and say like, oh yeah, that's the best classic one I've ever played. And I just wanted to mention that I
oh yeah, 100%.
Even before like we did this podcast, I remember booting up the Retro Engine demo.
I remember playing it on my Dreamcast.
Yeah.
You could burn it to a disc and play it on the Dreamcast.
And just kind of being amazed of like, wow, this feels correct.
Pixel perfect.
So what a piece of history. What a piece of history.
You could argue that this is maybe the most important Sonic fan game because, I mean...
Easily.
Well, you think about it, you mentioned Sonic Mania, but not just that. If you think about it, today, at the time of the recording of this podcast, and probably for a good long time, this is now the engine that the original Sonic games ran on.
Yeah. Yep.
The version that we are now playing of OG Sonic is running on Christian Whitehead's engine that was made for Retro Sonic. That is mind-blowing.
Wow.
Yes. Like, just, it really is just objectively, like, putting that on paper, that this thing that started as a fan recreation of how the classic games felt is now what the officially available versions are running on is super cool.
The original games rebuilt into it. That blows my mind.
And I think that is super cool. Like, I think we've already gone over, like, there are things to criticize about Origins as a package. And even some of the stuff we've been talking about today is inviting, like, criticism of, oh, this isn't 100% like I remember or whatnot. But just on its face, like, that is such an amazing, like, story of how that started and, like, how it is now. Like, talking about things that warm my heart.
Even if you're one of the people that were hugely disappointed by Origins, you can even go back to the mobile ports and even Sonic CD, the Xbox 360, PS3, and Steam port,
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about, how we all play these games at school when we weren't supposed to. I feel like the epitome of that is Ultimate Flash Sonic, which was
oh, yes.
honestly a pretty amazing port of Sonic Advance's general physics and feel into a Flash game, which was not something that I personally would have believed could have been done. Like, it honestly came pretty close to at least kind of carrying over the feel. And I remember everybody played this one just because it was so accessible.
Yeah, we all just used to be able to play Sonic at school on the computers, and we didn't care that it was some guy's bootleg. I think maybe that's my problem with it. It's less of a fan game and more of a bootleg.
Yeah, even looking at it, that it has a lot of things, like it has so many assets from Sonic Advance, but then like, the like the jumpy springs are just like a tweening shape instead of like the sprite itself. But yeah, this one really was like legendary as far as, I don't even know if I personally played it that much, but like would just come across like random kids on like, like I said, like a function or school or something, and they would like start talking about this game. And I did think it was funny. I'll have to go track it down. I thought the developer just recently tweeted something to the effect of like, oh yeah, the password system in Ultimate Flash Sonic and the code that unlocks everything. Well, I couldn't figure out how to make a code work, so the entry password is just accessing my 100% save file from developing the game, and I thought that was really funny and charming. Yep. Ultimate Flash Sonic is also seems like shifting into a new era because it's the advanced ones, is you've gotten some. Well, I say modern. I don't really mean that. I mean modern for the time of like, hey, there's Shadow the Hedgehog. He's finally showing up.
Well, he was already in there.
Yeah.
It's just everything past that sort of watershed of the Dreamcast, really, isn't it? Where everything kind of got a bit of a rebrand, which actually maybe not so much in the game models, but in the actual official art, what we see now as modern Sonic is actually really significantly different. But
yes,
we're now in postmodern Sonic.
yeah.
I know it is so funny to think of like there are really like several eras of Sonic with green eyes than just Dreamcast Sonic.
The game itself was not entirely, but somewhat disappointing. But I really loved the visual style they were going for with Lost World.
Yeah. I have revisited that. Trying to mod the PC version. Because hey, speaking of fans fixing stuff up,
Yeah, I heard people kind of fixed the physics in that version, didn't they?
yeah. And that game is incredibly charming, very pretty. I do love it is almost a concerted effort to bring a lot of the enemy designs to like, here are some classic badniks, except in 3D with beautiful bright colors. It's just, I don't really like playing the rest of that game, but I love how it looks.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
We're never going to be a Deadly Six apologist podcast, but the rest of it is good.
I remember you were coming to visit me for a convention the week that came out, and I remember our disappointments like being palpable as we actually like sat down to play the thing.
Bro, I brought the 3DS version with me and got to one of those special stages and turned it off and don't think I ever played it again.
I remember.
It's so nearly great. That's the
Yes.
So close.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about stuff that is great, though, we got to talk about the Sonic before and after the sequel trilogy.
good segue.
God, I love these games. They're so good.
Yeah.
They're so good. Yeah, LakeFeperd is just one of those people who gets it. Like, the first two games are just really solid 2D Sonic, and sometimes that's enough. Like, I love all the little extras around the fringe, the cutscenes and everything, kind of doing a fun bridge between the games in the same way that they would end up doing for Origins. But, like, I also have to give props for just kind of going absolutely nuts with the third game of the series, Chrono Adventure, and just really taking a lot of really interesting, risks and adding in, like, really trying to do something new with it beyond just make a fun 2D Sonic game.
This might be my white whale of Sonic fan games, to where I have over the years heard so many people talk about them and have not sat down to play all of them myself, and I'm like writing a note for myself right now because these are gorgeous.
They have that balance between the what, like I said, about being kind of original, resourceful, and creative and ambitious, but also being in that sort of post-Sonic Worlds engine era. So it's got the the recreation of the physics, etc. But it really feels like you're playing, the brainchild of LakeFeperd rather than. So it feels like you're playing, something. It's got his heart in it. It's not just, you're not just trying to create. Again, I'll use that phrase of, this is what Sonic 4 should have been. But it's just some guy's ideas and his own personal take on Sonic, and it's got it's got LakeFeperd written all over it, which would then become Spark, the Electric Jester, and all that.
This is very nerdy. That's one of the things I notice about it. Like, there is so much nerdy stuff going on here, and the kind of things that you wouldn't typically see from like a. Because it is, like you said, it's his game, and you wouldn't see, like, until Origins, you wouldn't see this sort of, like, explaining what happened between the games in a sort of, like, really nerdy kind of way, like giving, how did Tails learn how to do his little spinny propeller butt thing? Well, Origins explained it in, like, a couple seconds, but this one has, like, Tails have a different running style before he picks one up after Sonic in the cutscenes before the sequel. It's just really fun. I love it. Oh, and spoilers, at the end of the first game, if you got all the other 6 emeralds from Sonic 1, Sonic uncovers the 7th emerald and gets to be Super Sonic. It's like, explains that little plot hole. I love this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm not much of a stickler for continuity, but I sort of appreciate the people who are and when they do this stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I relate to that a lot, to where I I have witnessed over the years so many people get into like knockdown, drag out fights about, Sonic games are, goodness gracious, even Mario game continuity. And
God, why would you even
Don't even try.
Start doing
But
that
you know,
with
the one
Mario?
that I would argue is Zelda. Like, everybody tries to say, like, oh, when this one is and when this one is, to the point where Nintendo had to even make their own, which they made up on the spot, their own little timeline.
Yes,
And
exactly.
The whole point is they're free from the shackles of that. And you tell a good story which sort of, vaguely references the originals. But when a fan does it, when a creative and positive thinking fan does it, there's a certain charm to it. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. I love it, like you said, when it works, and it's usually on a much smaller scale, like we were just talking about, like, oh, how did Tails learn to fly?
Yeah.
Or, even little stuff in, I feel like the, a lot of the IDW Sonic comics are good about that.
Those are great.
For a lot of reasons where, and people who are, angry about it would argue it's like, well, it's because Sega puts restrictions and they can't fully acknowledge the games. And I said, or maybe it just works better when you reference things like that and people who know about old stuff. And anyway, I feel like I'm going on a tangent. I do relate to that feeling of liking, oh yeah, little continuity between like Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, but not being a stickler like, well, this contradicts this translated manual from 1993. Like, no, I am not that person.
I'm going to keep my mouth shut because I run the Transformers wiki, so I have no room to comment on this.
Once again, though, documenting is different.
Yeah. So like I said, the side of Sonic fan gaming that I've been really interested in over the last few years is the 3D side, because everybody has their own like interpretation of how 3D Sonic should be, and as a result, you get a lot of really different takes. Some of them, a lot of them are really, they're interesting. Like, I feel I can see where a lot of them are kind of coming from, mostly based on like what Sonic you grew up with. Like, there's a lot of people who are really into, the adventure games. There's people who are really into the boost games. There are people who like are strictly classic game people and really wish that there would be more of that in the games. And you can see all of those different interpretations in all of these different fan games. But generally speaking, there's been some really good ones over the years. Like, the one I feel like a lot of people talk about is that Sonic Utopia demo from several years ago. It's, still waiting on it, but I feel like that one was one of the ones that like really broke through into the mainstream conversation, had a lot of people talking about it.
That's the first one I remember. And again, I know we were joking about this. That was the first one I remember seeing the Sega hire this person. But I mean, I think that does just speak to that it blew a lot of people's minds with its examples.
Sonic Utopia is really cool and really impressive. I think my problem with it is it's got the whole thing of it when people say that, oh, Sega, why don't you just do this? And it's like, yes, this is very impressive, but do you want to design a level that works? Do you want to give it a try?
Yes.
Like, if you look at any gameplay of Sonic Utopia, you're kind of freely roaming around, and there are platforms, but you're just skipping over them because the physics just allow you to just kind of skip everything. There's a whole bunch of level design that you just breeze past, and it kind of feels it kind of shows why a 3D Sonic kind of has to be funneled into a almost a tunnel at times, if that makes sense.
Now hold on, Sam. Are you trying to tell me right now that game development is hard?
I think I'm saying, like,
It is.
when people say, why haven't
Sorry,
Sega done this? It's like, well, there are probably many reasons. And again, you play this demo and it really very much feels like a big tech demo. And look, I'm not insulting it. It's beautifully done, but I can't ever really imagine actual level design in this engine and this world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it feels great to play, but the problem is that since you've got this big open world, there's just not a whole lot to do in it. Like, you can kind of run freely around. There is an exit, but at the same time, you've got this big open space with no real objectives. Like, the enemies are kind of scattered around. It's it's a great proof of concept. It just needs kind of a little bit more focus to it.
To sort of add to that, it's more sort of there are things to do, but there's no reason to do them. I mean, but there are corkscrews, there are loops, there are things like that, but it's like you just run past them, jump over them, use all the momentum that you've gained to skip everything.
Which if I could kind of frame it a different way, is it's not so much we're like criticizing this.
No, not at all. It's absolutely amazing.
On the whole, it's I think we're saying that when you look at it, it's more of how would you take something built off this concept and turn it into a 15 to 20 hour game that you have to market and sell for $40 to $60.
Yes.
Which, and the answer is you wouldn't.
Yes, and I think that is the beauty of the fan games we were talking about, is that especially if it's a Sonic fan game that you're not planning on turning into a product to sell, then you don't have to worry about that. But Sega and Sonic Team do, and definitely have lots to criticize about them, things you don't like about the game, but at the end of the day they have to like turn around and sell you a new Sonic game, so that they got to do something more than what the Sonic Utopia demo says. But again, that's not to
a sandbox. Like it's a lovely sandbox.
Yes.
Fun for a while, but what we're really criticizing is the fans. The fans who are just pointing and saying, look at Sega, this is what you do. You just had Sonic run around. Like, okay, cool.
Then what?
I can probably sum it up, without going off on too much of a tangent, but effectively, when they made Sonic Unleashed, they showed that in terms of like actual units of measurement, he runs at 300 miles per hour. And when you think about generating 3D levels, the level designer has to model 300 miles worth of level for every hour of gameplay. And so what's your answer to that? You either repeat sections, you do like mission style stuff like you do in Generations, Secret Rings or the like, or you think of some other stuff that you do to slow you down. That's why we get werehogs, that's why we get emerald hunting, etc., just because this style of gameplay, it takes too long to make levels for.
Yeah.
Although I do feel like there's maybe a little bit of better balance than Werehog.
Oh, I completely agree.
Slowing it down and then there's bringing it to a dead halt.
No, I completely agree. I'm just saying, like, this is why they land on some of these bizarre decisions. It's because there's a reason they have to make them. Yeah.
Oh, man, these daytime stages are just too fun. Well, I've got an idea.
Well, I do think I think it's more of and I think they are correct for assuming this, is that even though people I don't really like the Werehog either, but then I think if they released a modern Sonic title in that era, like even Generations, like you said, Generations has lots of repeatable levels and missions. If they released a modern 3D Sonic game, even if it was the best the gameplay's ever felt, if it was only 3 or 4 hours long, I think people would lose their minds collectively.
Did you mean Sonic Forces?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good minds think alike.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, Sonic Forces is a really great 5 minutes of gameplay. Yeah.
And I mean, even that one has a lot of padding and extra missions and, the character creator. And, oh, man, that's a whole... That is definitely one, that is on the list of I want to examine, because that game also feels like they cut like a third to half of it out before they finished it. That is effectively the game that these games become if you don't find some kind of way of slowing it down or adding some kind of friction, Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting formula to think about.
It's a real dilemma, really.
A hedgehog's dilemma.
If you will. Yeah.
Oh my god, we're going existential. We're going to Evangelion, are we?
We're fully syncing up.
Unfamiliar ceiling.
Oh, so what was Sonic Utopia.
Great proof of concept, maybe needs a little more to like figure out how to build a game out of that.
I mean, the fact that we haven't had a full game yet, tells you a lot.
Yeah, I don't mean this as an insult to the game. It's fantastically put together. It's just when people say, oh, why aren't Sega doing this? There are many reasons, which I think, if you know much about game design, should be evident.
Yes, I think that's a perfect way to end that to wrap that up.
It's a really cool what if, isn't it?
Now, on the other side of things, you've got Sonic World DX, which is probably one of the more ambitious 3D games I've seen, just because of how much they are trying to do with it. It's like, okay, they've currently got 16 characters, 14 levels. They want to shoot for 50 and 40 respectively. And also work in a Chow Garden and a big open world space with stuff to find. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, go with God, because I don't know how you're going to pull all of that off. And I admit, like, I was harsh on like some of the earlier versions of this game, but I feel like with some of the more recent revisions, they finally started to crack that nut. Like, the level design has gotten better, the whole thing has gotten a lot more refined, and it still remains to be seen if they'll be able to pull it off all, by the time it's over. But it's clearly a very passionate team that is trying to do as much as they can, and I respect them for it.
Yeah.
It's going to be the best game of 2052.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly, Jake, that one of those you say, I wish them the best of luck, because it is one of those that, like you said, ambitious. I'd go for it. Don't want to stand in your way.
The GDD of this was just a Microsoft Word document with the phrase, "I can dream, Harold."
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the trailer now and I forgot that, the equipment shop, it's got the A guy from Sonic.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Just because they could. Although they do also have a lot of really interesting ideas. Like, one of the things I really like is that just like the main games, every game has like the 5 red star rings. And if you find them all, you unlock an encore version of that stage that turns it into a completely different stage with its own mechanics. So like Emerald Coast, if you unlock the encore version of that, it's still Emerald Coast, but it's the Sonic Shuffle version. So there's like little things on the ground you can walk over that will do, like, have extra effects, like give you rings or take damage. And I think that's such a clever idea, and I really respect, a lot of creativity there.
Man, I'm sorry, I'm on the official webpage now, looking at the characters list. We've already spoiled how many there are, but it's just Sonic the Hedgehog, Miles Tails Prower, Knuckles the Echidna, Amy Rose, Shadow the Hedgehog, Rouge the Bat, Cream the Rabbit and Cheese, Blaze the Cat, Silver the Hedgehog, E123 Omega, Espio the Comedian, Charmy Bee, Vector the Crocodile, Big the Cat and Froggy, Marine the Raccoon, Mighty the Armadillo, Ray the Flying Squirrel, Chaos, Takal the Echidna, Fang the Sniper, Bean the Dynamite, Bark the Polar Bear, Jet the Hawk, Wave the Swallow, Storm the Albatross, Tiara the Manx, that's Tiara Bundowski from Sonic Extreme,
Oh my goodness.
Honey the Cat, Shade the Echidna, Mephiles the Dark, Heavy and Bomb, and the rest.
And the rest.
There's a lot here.
It is a game where they are trying to do as much as possible, and for the most part, like, the quality is holding up pretty well for everything they're trying to do. So I'm eager to see how far they can get with that one. On sort of a different spectrum, one game that is probably one of the better 3D Sonic fan games I've seen, short and sweet, is Sonic GT, which I streamed that for these guys, and we were all kind of in agreement that, like, this one, it's very short, but it's kind of the full package.
This feels the closest to me, like I was talking about all the classic Sonic fan games, of doing your own thing, and something that, like, Sega would never do, because this one has a fully voiced, like, story. Mighty the Armadillo is like one of the main characters. A lot of the cutscenes are presented in like a visual novel style, and it really does feel like, like we were saying before, is they just took Sonic as like the frameworks and then did like their own cool, uniquely inspired thing with it, and I just can't help but admire that.
And Sonic is kind of an the Shadow in this. It's a line he says where he says, "Is it bad if I say I kind of liked him best when he was sacrificing himself for the sake of the planet?"
Oh, yeah.
And Tails immediately follows up like, "You shouldn't joke like that." Who's joking?
Yep.
Big STC energy. The game honestly feels like really good to play, the way it uses momentum and also a lot of the more modern mechanics without having to rely on the boost as well. Like, it feels like a really good balance between classic and modern sensibilities with also some good level design to back that up. And I'm really excited to see what that developer goes on to make in the future.
It's a game. That's the
It
thing.
really is.
They've got all they's cool concepts, but they're making a game out of it. I really like it.
Yes, it's a big deal. It can be, there's a difference between making a game and proving a concept, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a couple others that we definitely wanted to shout out. Sonic Smackdown is an interesting one. It's a 2D fighting game using Sonic characters. And, it's a lot of reused animations from other fighting games. Like, you can see Chaos used a lot of Venom animations. Sonic is based on Rashid. Blaze is just Akuma. But it's actually found a lot of, play with a lot of professional fighting game players. So it's kind of getting outside of just the Sonic fan game circle. And that's kind of cool to see.
It's almost showing an alternate take on Sonic the Fighter, something that could be a lot deeper and, better put together.
Yeah, it's definitely more in line with what you'd expect out of a Marvel vs. Capcom.
Which I realize I spent ages going on about the whole thing. No, this is what Sega should have made, and then I've said exactly that about Sonic the Fighters. But you know what I mean.
Yes.
A little bit.
We know the difference. I mean, yeah. I just to say that the fact that Sonic the Fighters and Sonic Battle exists, that they could do something. They could do something more in line with a traditional fighting game, and I think people would really like it.
One that I know Jake and Jeremy were big fans of is Sonic and the Fallen Star, which just came out recently.
Well, in preparation for this episode, I was looking at the Sage 2022 list of games that were out, and I saw this in the listing. And I was like, that looks pretty cool. Let me try that out. And yesterday, for the most part, and a little bit today, I was able to play it. And man, this Sonic and the Fallen Star it rocks. It is so good. The controls are tight. The animations and everything are so cool. I love one of my favorite little design aspects that I really love is that when Sonic jumps as he's falling down, he has his arms and legs spread out completely, he's anticipating the fall, and it's just there's so many cool little attention to detail things. And
that's actually the Sonic fan game classic. Is doing the old Sonic CD dropping after he comes out of a roll, but it's run really nicely here. I really like the bespoke animation and style.
I think this is a great example of how we talked about how Sonic fan games kind of shifted into, let's just replicate the classic ones. And I feel like fast forward, and this is a great example of how you can do that and make a completely fresh and original thing, because it feels like this thing has 100% unique art assets and sound design and music, and it still feels like a what you would call a Sonic game, and still has I think we also joke on and off air it's a Sonic fan game because it has the super peel out in it, even though that was only in Sonic CD, but it looks really great in this game. And yeah, it's just great. There's a lot of verticality, which if I had to compare it, feels maybe like a Sonic Rush thing, to where you can not only get on the high the high area of the level layout, but go beyond that. If you want to zip across the top because you hit the jump panels just right. But would highly recommend people check out Sonic and the Fallen Star.
Yeah,
it's our complete game. It's done. I mean, I'm sure there'll be other versions, but yeah, it looks great.
Hey, your editor Game Buddy here to let you know that, unfortunately, after this point in the episode, Sam was kidnapped and taken prisoner by the evil Metal Sonic, which is much more interesting than the reality that we were keeping him up very late with our recording, and he had other things to attend to, being a responsible adult. We're very thankful that he could hang out and share some of his game developer knowledge, and we hope you check him out at FreakZone Games and give Spectacular Sparky and their other projects a try. They're a lot of fun.
So, one game that I will always go to bat for is Big's Big World, which I shared it with these guys for the first time leading up to this episode. I know Chris had seen it. I don't think Jeremy or Jake had, and that is a game that feels like it meets what Sam was talking about earlier, about somebody who just had an idea and developed it until it all came together. And it really does feel like it has that old fighting game mentality to it.
Yes, I think this ticks a lot of boxes we have come up with, is that it's, like you said, it's a big sandbox, but there's things to do. Also, it does cute little continuity things by populating this world with every possible reference you could think of. And also, yeah, does things that a official Sonic game never would, like making an entire standalone game starring Big, who can collect the Chaos Emeralds and achieve a super form.
Spoilers, but this is I like to consider this part of Big's big renaissance that we've been seeing of late, because even returning to Sonic Frontiers, this is a great part of the new Big return to form.
And it's interesting that the game has found an audience as well. Like, I've found like an entire speedrunning community around that game just to see who can find Froggy as fast as possible.
Yeah, I remember you were sharing some strats while you were playing it, like, oh, you got to go get this emerald first because it has this power, and oh man, that's good stuff.
Yeah, and it's clearly a passion project. You don't model Little Planet and the mountain with a chain tied to it, or the entire Robotnik Observatory from Adventures of Sonic, if you're not passionate. And of course, we can't talk about Sonic fan games without talking about Sonic Dreams Collection.
Ah, yes.
This is well known and understood by many people who aren't even Sonic fans.
We don't have to spend a long time on it. I just wanted to go to bat for this one because I think if you've only experienced it through YouTube personalities, no shade to anyone in particular, you might think that this is just a taking the piss out of like the weird corners of Sonic fandom, but I really like Arcane Kids' games. The one they did before this was Bubsy 3D, Bubsy Visits the James Turrell retrospective, which, again, I'm saying if you haven't played it, go out and play it. I think they actually end up achieving like a very smart, like, satire / critique of video games as an art medium. And even though there is some weird in Sonic Dreams Collection, I find it very charming in its silliness. I feel like there's not a ton of naked judgment on the weird stuff that they are necessarily poking fun at in Dreams Collection. It's definitely still available to track down. I would recommend experiencing it yourself instead of just an admittedly funny video.
There's a whole bit where Sonic is your roommate and Eggman is your wingman, sending you messages on an old Nokia phone, and it has to be experienced, I think.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes, I just a video does not do it justice.
And that's not even the weirdest thing in the video, or in the game itself. So, yeah, that's we would be remiss not to mention it.
Yeah, honestly, the best part of looking back at all these fan games is to see how many of these developers have gone on to actually produce original content. Honestly, you look at Freedom Planet, which started life as a Sonic fan game and went on to its own great success. You look at Spark the Electric Jester, which has become a whole sub-series that spawned from LakeFeperd's work on before and after the sequel. You look at, there's plenty of other games coming out, like the Sonic GT team is working now on Project Rascal. You see other Sonic fan games that have shifted to original stuff, like Brock Crocodile, Advent Neon, Lightspeed Lena, Mina and Melody. Like we talked about before, everything with like Taxman and Stealth on, Sonic Mania and all of the more recent Sonic ports. It's just really nice to see so much of that, so many of these people who hone their skills making these fan games going on to much bigger and greater things.
And even our poor dear kidnapped friend Sam, with his FreakZone Games catalogue of memorable fan games, has gone on to, yes, he creates some great fan games, but he's also gone on to create some real legitimate games out there, including the Angry Video Game Nerd video games, and of course Spectacular Sparky, which you've already gushed about.
And we're going to keep gushing about.
I remember I did not know who Sam was back when those original Angry Video Game Nerd games came out, and remember seeing pop up on some the Let's Players and stuff I follow, and they are incredibly charming games for I mean, look, I guess it is unique that it is an internet personality based like licensed game, but I mean, when you think licensed games, especially in that style, it's hard not to immediately think like, okay, well, what are we getting ourselves into here? And I was very surprised at how great those games are, and have rightly so have a nice a fandom of themselves. And yeah, like, you know, this whole time I've been gushing about Spectacular Sparky and what a fun game that is, and really does feel like a lost Mega Drive title that was just plucked out of thin air.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, I even looked up FreakZone Games, and they made the that cool Manos the Hands of Fate game. I love that. It's even Torgo's Pizza and Spectacular Sparky on a billboard. So yeah, I like I said, I wish I had a better way to describe, like, oh yeah, these fan game makers that have created their own thing that they can put out, but they have created their own worlds with these original games, and like you said, stuff like Freedom Planet and Spectacular Sparky just really do feel like they carry the spirit of those fan games that is kind of unique to even Sonic games as a whole. I feel like they carry on that spirit while still being their own original thing.
Yeah.
And I think in a way we can kind of circle back around to the fact that Sega, again, doesn't have a scorched earth policy when it comes to fan games, because like we all know that, you know, forums and community websites are a thing that exists, and therefore people can associate and talk about game development and stuff. But the fact that Sega doesn't go out and try to stomp down every single fan game that comes out, it not only allows people to be creative, but it allows people to be able to discuss back and forth, especially people who are in game development and really know what they're talking about, allowing people to talk about, hey, this is a great game. Here's some suggestions that could really elevate it. And then, you know, honestly, I don't know the personal history of all these people who have ascended to these more legitimate, what we're calling it, games that are sold on like e-markets and stuff. But I'd be willing to bet that, like, because of the community around it, they probably got to have some very critically good feedback that helped them inform better game making decisions that led to the games that they made, like Freedom Planet, like Spectacular Sparky, like MIDI and Melody and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think you're right that they were able to carry the best parts of that community forward with them when getting feedback for their new games.
And you know, Sega, they like the fans a bit. They've let, not just in like games, various fans have sort of ended up contributing to Sega for real in future titles, and it's pretty great. Seeing the people who grew up with Sonic just like us going on to be a part of the franchise. And that's why we got Sonic Mania, which is a really good one, even if we kind of dunked on all the people who just copy it now.
Well, yes, like we tried to always wrap around. We dunk with love. Like we're not, yes. And again, just want to reiterate for as many problems as I have with Sega is that, yes, the fact that they just got to say that, like, compared to Nintendo, like, hey man, I had to torrent an unfinished version of another Metroid 2 remake just to play it because it's insane. It is absolutely crazy, the draconian attitude that Nintendo has with anyone trying to make even an obvious, like, send up / parody game using, you know, even referencing their property, and they will just absolutely, like, fire all cannons at you, scorched earth. So it is absolutely a breath of fresh air to see Sega just say, yeah, whatever.
Well, Sega does, as they say.
What Nintendo don't.
What Nintendo don't.
But yeah, that about brings us to the end of the episode. So you can find me on Twitter at Cyberlink420.
You can find me at Twitter and all the socials at Faulero. That's FAULERRO.
Ooh, I like this new spin on the jingle.
Yeah, I gotta remix it for the modern day.
You can find me on Twitter at GreatJobJeremy. That's GR and the number 8. And GameBuddy, just about everywhere else. Sometimes there's a 1, 2, 3 in there.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at RockTheJake, and you can find me on Twitch at Mr. RockTheJake.
And you can find Sam on Twitter at FreakZone Games. Also, make sure to check out his website at freakzonegames.com.
Hopefully, by the time you hear this episode, he'll be free from the clutches of Metal Sonic, and you'll be able to continue twittering and using all of the social medias. But
no promises.
Oh, I don't know.
And special thanks, as always, to Amy Waters for the use of our theme song from the album Gotta Go Slow. You can find more of her work on YouTube and Bandcamp. And, of course, remember to subscribe, review, share, all that good stuff to help us grow the podcast and get it out there a little bit more so we can keep doing it.
Especially in a case like this where we get to really shine a spotlight on some just wonderful fan community games.
Amen to that. Now, as for our next episode, we're not going to tell you what we're doing because it's going to be something a little different. Something seasonal, let's say.
Yeah, I like when we do this and we have a seasonal episode coming up and we're just like, we're not going to tell you what it is. It's going to be a surprise. Just like a present that you might get at this time of the year.
And it's definitely not because our plans might fall through.
Absolutely not. Never. It's never happened.
But join us for something that matches this time of the year, this romantic time of the year. Or maybe it won't. I guess we'll find out together.
But until then, I'm Cyberlink.
I'm Valero.
I'm GameBuddy.
And I'm RockTheJake.
And this is where Sam would come in to read the final trivia quote, as we tend to give to our guests. But unfortunately, he is in the clutches of Metal Sonic. But fortunately, he took the time to record it ahead of time because he was very excited to share that with us. So, Jeremy, if you'd be happy to play that for us.
I brought with me for you guys some of the wisdom of Tikal from Sonic Adventure, the Ancient Echidna, because I feel like she's got some lines which I'd like to see in fortune cookies. So I'm going to give you some of the some wise quotes from Tikal the Echidna that belong in fortune cookies before I go. Okay, so get on to something before you drown. Something good may happen at the casino area. You can break through the wall if you use dynamite. Something might happen if you get on top and swing your hammer. Use the bowling ball to slow down your pursuers. Don't just aim for the legs, aim for the cockpit. And finally, try using consecutive punches.